too bad we have to be careful what we
And
say.
I believe we're on. Hello, everyone. How you doing today?
Yeah.
Oh, now you guys clam up.
Now we
Can't
gotta watch
shut
what we
you
gotta
guys
say
up before
because-
we start, but as soon as I hit start...
Well, that's because, well, like I said earlier before we started, that's because we gotta watch what we say on YouTube, because if we say something funny, or if we do that joke where we pretend like we're talking about something super duper inappropriate, and then it's like, and then I found this big thing in my, oh wait, is this thing on? If we do that, we get, we get count struck.
Yep.
Mm. then again, YouTube will strike you for almost anything, and you're sadly experienced one of those people where it's like, your video has been struck. Why is that? Well, it's because you had misinformation. Where's the misinformation?
At least now you can apparently live stream with a strike, because they still have that one strike on me where they claimed I had nudity in an audio podcast.
It's because the background was white.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that must mean it's racist. People have asked me to do a dark background for that, because people like that. The problem is it messes with the QR codes. Because some QR readers can handle it when the colors are reversed, but it's not part of the standard, and it doesn't work with all of them, so... Stuck with the lighter background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but hey, words can be naked. You know how naughty those words are? You can see the lines they're made of.
No, because then they'll remove your channel, Rainbow. They'll take you off for like 3 strikes in 90 days.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the QR codes, Rainbow, that I put on the screen.
Don't ask me what QR codes are, because I have no idea.
Those are those little blocky things you scan with your phone.
Oh.
And then you can, well, they can be links, they can be text, they can be anything, really.
You know, Shane, I think we had this conversation a long, long time ago when I was actually a regular, co-host on the podcast and all that, and we brought the stuff about encryption. Is like, the fact that I know next to nothing, especially a lot of people know next to nothing about computer coding and all that, that's exactly why we need strong encryption.
Yep.
Because I think you mentioned this, if you have the knowledge and know-how, you can make, any computer, encrypted and no one will ever find your data. But the problem is that most people don't have that knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, that's something I think they ought to teach in schools. Things like, how to make a good password, how to use a password manager, how to take basic precautions against cybersecurity threats.
Oh, yeah.
Because most people are just like, oh, well, I run a virus protector and that protects me. Well, no, it doesn't. It protects you against some things, but not others.
Yeah, and here's the thing, people are like, yeah, but I don't use my device, to explore, to explore the dark recesses of the internet, so no one will get my information. Well, I barely use my phone. For the internet, other than to, look up music or podcasts when I'm driving, and I still get texts and emails through my phone from random numbers that I'm pretty sure are just people trying to con me.
Yep. Oh, I have so many people who are calling me concerned that the warranty on my car is about to expire, and I need to call them back so they can renew it. I don't have a warranty on my car. It's a 2008.
Oh, yeah.
Warranty isn't something that's normally renewed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so the
whole point of the warranty, and it's written right in the paper, is that, it's only good up until a certain point,
Well, like, the whole point of a warranty is because every machine has an expected mean time between failures, but because it's a mean time and not a guaranteed time, it's like, alright, well, if it gets out of the factory and it breaks 5 minutes later, we'll just throw it back in and fix it, because that's not that, that clearly a manufacturing error.
Yeah. So what do you guys want to talk about?
Yeah.
We can talk about Bradley McPhee's question, if you want. What is everyone's opinion on the argument that colonialism is why so many countries are poor?
Well, then, if that were the case, then Africa would have become a rich nation in the 1940s.
Well, I don't know, because
Because
you did have things like apartheid and everything up to the 80s, but
yeah.
I mean, if you look at how quickly Hong Kong went from slums to prosperity, that's been about the same amount of time they, kicked Whitey out of South Africa, so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and...
Hey, Hawkeye, how you doing? Long time no see.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh yeah, that's right. He asked me if I wanted to do this RP exercise with him, and I told him I can't. I'm on Shane's live stream, and I guess he's like, "Oh, whoa, yeah."
Yep.
Yeah,
about the only thing I see from him lately is I follow his comic Playtime, but
yeah. Yeah, from what I'm getting, I guess he kind of did what, some guys like Hoodie Demon and to a lesser extent, Dapperton did, and they're like, you know what? I'm tired of this internet drama. I'm just going off.
Or like Tom Lehrer, where he just decided that he said everything he wanted to say, so he got off the stage and focused on his mathematics. Yeah, and Bradley does point out, oddly enough, many African countries were in better shape during colonialism than now. Well, because they went socialist. And isn't socialism from a bunch of white Europeans? So what are you doing?
Yeah, that's another irony. Is that, it's like people... It's like, people are like, capitalism is an evil Western ideology. It's like, well, guess what? By their technical definition, communism and Marxism is a Western ideology. Yeah, people, communism didn't come from Russia. Hell, contrary to popular belief, it didn't even come from Karl Marx. Ideas of communism go all the way back, to the medieval period.
Oh, earlier than that, Roman Empire.
Much earlier than that.
Hell, I would even argue that, and this will make a lot of leftists read, but feudalism in a way was kind of a form of communism in a way, because everything was communally owned. You didn't own the land you were working on. It was owned, by God, and the Lord in charge of the feudal era, he was the manager, and thus that's why he got the bigger cut. Yeah, it's funny how so many people love to claim that libertarianism will lead to feudalism, yet feudalism is more akin to communism than capitalism.
If you actually read the Communist Manifesto, I have not finished the Communist Manifesto simply because I just can't get through it, because like every second page I sit there going, Marx is just simping for serfdom at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well,
he was just pining for the old ways where, because he didn't want to have to work.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like he's going on about, oh, we've lost like the dignity of work. It's like, what dignity? What dignity was there in working in the feudal era where like you couldn't own anything you produced?
Yeah.
Simply living in your house incurs a tax that you have to pay to the law, which is like 80% of your harvest. Like, what dignity is there in that?
Yeah, I know that. I pay property tax every year.
Yeah. Yeah, and Shane, and I know that, and I love, speaking of the Communist Manifesto, I love when Hoodie Demon was online, he had a good, it was, I think you and him and those other people were doing the questions, libertarians have for communists, and he said, listen, you all say, oh no, that's not true, socialism or communism, because that's not what Karl Marx said. Well, that's basically the equivalent of saying communism is this. That's basically the equivalent of saying God is the real true believer, and he's saying this because the Bible says so.
Yep.
Mm.
Whereas they talk about capitalism, being from European colonialism. Capitalism is just leaving people alone to do what they want.
Oh,
capitalism would be the opposite of colonialism, because wasn't colonialism built on this idea of mercantilism, where you go in, you create a colonial holding that effectively acts as a banana republic?
Oh yeah,
and creates goods for the home nation. It was effectively outsourced socialism.
Yeah, I mean, and I will say this: one of the biggest, things that I am tired of hearing is people say is like when I ask people, for example, of proof that capitalism leads to, where has there ever been, a quote unquote corporate dictatorship? And they use the East Indian Trading Company as an example. It's like, people, the East Indian Trading Company did what it did because it had a notice signed by the King of England saying the East Indian Trading Company has governmental powers over its charter.
Yep. Yeah, Hoodie Demon left social media entirely, even under his real name. He just swore off the whole thing. So no, there's no convincing him to come back.
Yeah, I briefly talked to him for a little bit before he left, and he did kind of have this attitude that he was tired of it, and he's just like, what, it's getting crazy. I just want to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, my guess is because he was experiencing a tech difficulty. I think he got hacked or something, and then finally he's just like. And my only theory, now granted, I can't say this for certain because I'm not him, but my guess is after that one incident, where his information got compromised, he's just like, what, screw this, I'm done. Yeah. I don't want to do it anymore. Which I don't blame him,
Yeah, I don't think it was because of his politics. I think it was just, the toxic environment, the risk, the fact that you're losing so much of your, personal information and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like Dapperton, where Dapperton had to leave YouTube for a long time and he's not as prevalent as he used to be anymore. Is because wasn't like his family threatened or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people keyed his car and started making threats against his son, and
yeah. And by the way, SJWs, this was legitimate death threats, not the whole this guy said you should kill yourself. That's not a death threat, people. A death threat is sending people saying, hey, I found his information, here's his address and a picture of his home, go harass him.
Yeah, reason I don't know about. I mean, we were making Libertoons, and there was one point I think we were doing the murder of Lord Killian. He posted in our little chat group and said, "Hey, I'm still here," but we didn't hear anything back from him since then, and that was after he had stopped posting for a while. But I guess he's still around, but he's just not active.
Yeah, he's not as active as he used to be, and like from what I've heard, the channels he has up, most of it is just like reposts of stuff he did years and years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like I said, I can't 100% blame him, I
mean, it's a lot to try to manage these days.
Yep.
Especially with all the crap going on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is a good one from Hawkeye. Want to really frustrate them? I'm guessing socialists here. Ask them for a definition that Marx and Engels agreed on. I mean, just get them to agree on a definition. That's bad enough.
Oh yeah, even though Marx and Engels, were communists and were allies, they disagreed with each other all the time. Like Marx would say, the definition of this of this is this, but Engels will go, actually, it's that. Marx is just giving a simplified answer, and Marx would be like, no, I mean this definition is equal to this, and they're like, no, it's this.
Well, they couldn't even agree with themselves because, it's all about labor and the laborers, but, Marx kept changing his mind on what counted as labor.
Oh, yeah.
Because basically, he wanted laborers basically to be factory workers, and farmers he actually considered part of the bourgeois.
Oh, yeah.
And that actually carried over into the Soviet Union, which is why they, kept taking over the farms. They kept seizing the farms for the Great Collective, which means that everyone starved. And imagine that.
And it was even worse in China. And I've actually heard one of the reasons why China starved to death was because Mao Zedong said, yeah, we got to do that. China needs to stop being a farming nation. We got to be this powerful industrialized complex. So he had all these factories built and all that. And he put all these people in. And this is actually where the stereotype of made in China being crap is because he put all these people who had been farmers all their life and they're saying, okay, now we need you guys to be welders and mechanics and all that. And there's these people that are like, the only machine I've ever worked on is my manual, bean sorter. I don't know how to operate this welding machine.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was because communism rejected Darwin and stuck with Lyshenkoism, which was an earlier theory. Basically, it was based on Lamarckian evolution, which basically meant that you could train, crops to grow, more densely and things like that. And so they implemented that in China, because this is basically a religion. So they didn't do anything like test crops or anything like that. They just pretty much overnight converted the farms over to that. And of course it didn't work.
Yeah, here's another fact that people fail to realize. Communism is to blame for why, many famous Chinese creatures like tigers and the panda are disappearing because some of the economic policies, especially, the Four Pests campaign, completely destroyed China's food chain and natural environment.
I don't know what Gnostic Taija is talking about with the famous Pai Ji Eri. You know what he's talking about there?
No idea.
No. All right. And Rainbow Asteroids asks, why don't you do guest stars on the podcast anymore? It's really a scheduling thing on my end. It's just things got crazy in my life.
Oh, I guess he's trying to pronounce, how it would probably be pronounced in Russia. So I guess he's referring to a Russian term or something.
Okay, said, I heard there's a grocery black market in North Korea, and the authorities are looking the other way on it because the people will turn on them if they crack down on it. Yeah, that sounds like Venezuela and cryptocurrency. They made that lame attempt at making their own cryptocurrency, and that didn't work. So they're just turning a blind eye.
I've actually heard that, from like actual Korean defectors that they've actually said that, believe it or not, there's parts of Pyongyang where it actually looks like Seoul to a degree in South Korea. There's markets and stores everywhere, and they also have and they even have, malls and all that. And I'm like, but isn't that illegal? And it's like, yeah, under North Korean law, it's illegal, but they're bringing in so much money and customers that the authorities turn a blind eye to them.
Yeah. And see, Naruto points out, the farmers made steel that was terrible and left to rust. And then, plus communist China killed the sparrows. Oh yeah, killing the sparrows meant that the sparrows...
Yeah, as I said, the Four Pests program, where they killed off a bunch of animals because they thought, oh, these are evil pests. But it turns out
these are evil pests that eat all the grain. Turns out locusts eat a lot more grain than sparrows do, and the sparrows are eating the locusts.
Yep.
Yeah, they literally, yeah, if I recall correctly, they literally caused a historical Chinese sparrow to go extinct, and they had to import some sparrows from the Soviet Union.
Hawkeye, I would love to have you on again. Like I say, it's just a matter of stuff from mine. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and I just kind of record the podcast when I get to it. So trying to schedule it with a co-host is next to impossible. Otherwise, I would love to have you.
It's nothing personal, Hawkeye, because, normally, historically, he would ask, he would normally ask, say, it's like, okay, we're going to have the podcast soon. Anyone wish to join? And whoever was the first to say, yeah, I can do it, you generally accepted it. But now you haven't been asking. You're just saying, here's the podcast.
Yeah. That's been a couple of years now, I think, since I've had anyone on, because I never know when I'm recording.
Yeah, real life got in the way.
Yep.
It does.
That's actually becoming a popular t-shirt I see. It's like a t-shirt. It's got, like, the 5-star thing, and but only 1 star is highlighted, and it usually says something along the line of real life or adulting. 1 star, wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, now I understand the meaning of, a long time ago when our parents and grandparents would tell us, oh, don't wish to grow up too soon, kids, because it's going to happen and you're going to miss this. And now I can see why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being an adult makes me think of the 9/11 episode of South Park, where they're all wearing gas masks, and they're like, remember when everything used to be so simple and cool? I feel like that's some days in real life. It's like, remember when things used to be simple and cool and you didn't have to worry about anything?
Yep. Well, if we're up for a subject change, see, Naruto wants our thoughts on private prisons, and I guess I'm gonna have to ask, what we have now about private prisons isn't private prisons at all. They're just, the government's kind of farmed out the running of the prison to a private company, but it's still up to the government,
I see so many people blame America's, incarceration problem on private prisons. Oh, because they lobby, and, like, there's all these debunkings of them. But the thing is, it's like, listen, people, the private prisons, don't put people there. It's the government that puts them there.
And mostly the war on drugs, which was there a long time before the private prisons were.
Yeah, even Simon Whistler fell for it. He's like, many people say the increase in people being in prison and the cruelty of prisons increasing was because of the war on drugs, but that doesn't match. It's like, no, it matches perfectly.
Yeah, Simon Whistler is just so hit or miss.
Yeah, because he's got some good videos, and, there's even some times where he actually kind of sounds libertarian to a degree, but then he says something stupid, Then again, to be fair, I have heard that a lot of the videos, like those videos he's done, though he doesn't actually write those are done by his editors. So whether or not what type of political view he has that day, I guess, depends on the editor.
Yep.
Because he does have, videos where it's just him and him alone speaking, and he doesn't, have a script, and if he does, he goes off on it a lot, and usually, he actually seems kind of like a funny, chill guy, it's just...
I mean, he seems like a guy I'd probably like if I met him personally, but, just a lot of stuff in his videos are like that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
And Hawkeye points out we don't even know if prisons are the best way to deal with criminals. It's just the way we've been doing it forever, and we have no reason to look into alternatives because it's a monopoly. That's just what's going to happen.
Well, and here's another fun thing too, is that actually the idea of putting someone away for years at a time, that's actually a quote-unquote new concept itself. Historically speaking, if you committed a crime, typically you were either killed or you would be punished in a way that they felt would fit the crime. So, like, for instance, if you stole from someone, the penalty might be, okay, you have to either pay the guy, what it's worth of what you stole, or you have to work for him until you develop, the credit, that would be required to pay it off or stuff like that. The idea of how, oh, you committed a crime, let's throw you in solitary confinement until you're 83 years old. That's actually a very recent thing.
Yeah. JC Armitage says, government calls all the shots with all prisons. How exactly could that be considered private? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've
Government
actually
makes
done
all
some
the
research.
rules.
Yeah, I've done some research on some of those private prisons, and from what I'm seeing, they're not actually really quote unquote private. It's more like they're a government facility, but the government is hiring a company to provide the security and maintenance.
It's kind of like, the government makes the roads, but they actually, contract out to a company to actually, do the grading and lay the pavement and everything, but they're still government roads. So those are private prisons the way we have private roads,
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Just another example of it's private when the government does something we don't like, but public when the government does something we do like.
No, yeah.
You can't get away with doing that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, that is true.
Hawkeye mentions banishment if someone has a mile-long rap sheet and clearly has no intention of being a productive citizen. Why not just eject them completely? But how are you going to eject them from their own property? If they own a house, you can't kick them out of their own house. I mean, if you're a landlord and they're renters, you're like, yeah, we've got a morality clause. You've committed too many crimes. You're out of here. But
well, and to be fair, that would already happen, in quote unquote ANCAP society, because let's be real here, would you want to do business with Bernie Madoff if he were magically released from prison? Would you want to do business with him?
Yeah.
Would you want to do business with the guys that created Enron? Would you want to do business with them?
Would you want to do business with the Manson family?
Yeah, that's the thing that people fail to realize is that the markets is that people, that's another thing too. That's another thing that I think gets mentioned a lot. As the old saying goes, the government steps in front of the parade and pretends to leave. As they always talk about how, oh, this company did this and it did this, and because of it now things have changed. But the thing is, if you actually read it, it's like, yeah, things changed, but it wasn't the government. It was other companies going, okay, this company did something really, really messed up, and it caused them to go bankrupt. We can't be doing that anymore. And then the government, after all the companies have pretty much already done that, pass a law and say, yep, they'll never do it again. We passed this law.
Yeah. All you have to do is magically pass a law and that stops it.
Yeah. I mean, hell, cancel culture is kind of proof, about how bad companies would be dealt with in a government-less society. If a company rips you off or dumps toxic waste into a river, what's going to happen? People are going to say, hey, this company's dumping toxic waste into a river. Don't buy from them. And people are going to be like, yeah, that's bad. Don't buy from them.
Yeah, and as Rainbow Asteroid says, that's why nobody ever does drugs or buy guns. Yep.
Yeah, people seem to completely ignore the fact that writing a law doesn't actually stop people from doing something. It merely outlines a punishment that the government is going to inflict on someone if they catch you.
Yep.
Yeah, they act. Yeah, a lot of people act like laws are. It kind of reminds me of that one parent, that was very angry because of the lack of security in his school, and he was scared for his kid's safety. And to prove his point, he literally pulled out a switchblade knife and said, look, I smuggled this in here. What are you going to do if someone came in with ill intentions? And all they could do was say, you can't do that. That's against the rule. And he kept saying, no, that's the whole point. If I was a crazy maniac bent on stabbing someone, I wouldn't care. Here, What are you guys going to do to protect my kids if someone like that does get in there? And all they kept doing was, sir, you can't do that. That's against the rule. And they were completely missing his point.
Mm-hmm. Naruto also asks about private medieval Iceland courts. Should they be what we strive for in Nankabistan? And I think the main problem with those is you just couldn't leave the system and set up your own if you wanted. You got to select which district you were in. They had a word for it. I forget what it is, but it's basically like a district. You could select your own district, but you couldn't get out of the district system entirely.
At least that's a step up.
True.
I think a better alternative would be, I don't know what they were called, but I was reading about this with stateless Somalia, and people were like, well, how did the well, how did the people of Somalia handle criminals when it was a stateless society? And basically, it was often, up to many tribes. They would often get, tribe leaders, they would often get tribes, and they would call in the community to come up with a verdict. And it was really more like, and it was really more like, I don't know what the term is, but it's where you don't go to court, but you still hire someone, and you all sign a contract saying you're going to, you sign a contract saying you're going to, follow whatever this, whatever, the mediary says.
Yeah.
The reason United Airlines is still around is because it's a government-backed monopoly.
Yeah, they keep bailing them out every few years. Yeah,
yeah.
Gnostic says, I'd have to double check, but I believe the buying land here, and he's in Poland, is legally phrased as buying the rights to the land, so it's basically a glorified lease. You buy permission from the government to use the land.
Yeah, that's stupid. Look, the way you acquire property, and I think we talked about it, is to do one of two things. You either purchase it from the owner, and people always ask the question, well, what if nobody's using the land? How do you own it? Then that's what, we call homesteading. If there's literally nobody laying a claim to something and nobody's saying, I own this or what, you just say, okay, I'm going to build a house there, and then you own the house, and therefore you own a certain amount of property on that house, because that house and that farm wouldn't exist if you didn't come along and build it.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, Rainbow Asteroid, the reason why United Airlines still exists and many of the other airlines is because they're a government-backed monopoly. And fun fact, United Airlines only exists because of the government.
Yeah, and government keeps bailing them out and keeps subsidizing them, and yeah.
Yeah, I saw a video by the company man, and he did a history of United Airlines. It was like why they were hated, and basically United Airlines was created because there was pressure from the government for all these independent, airplane corporations, to merge together to make it easier to manage.
Yep.
Yeah. And in all honesty, from what I've read, a lot of the issues with United Airlines too, isn't even 100% the company's fault because historically speaking, while they didn't have the best reputation, they still provided an adequate good and service, and the service wasn't too bad. Really, United Airlines didn't get a bad reputation until 9/11, and the government basically started micromanaging the airlines.
Sorry about that. I just cut the AC off. It was getting upwards of 80 in here, so I had it on, so I've taken it off now. Maybe my audio quality is a little better now that I don't have that noise in the background. Oh, and now Hawkeye wants to talk about the COVID power grabs. Are public leaders going to have to get directly threatened before they abandon this insanity? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the courts about this, and a lot of people that have, really good court cases about this that have a real chance of succeeding.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court is actually cracking down and saying, listen, these emergency protocols and vaccination mandates are unconstitutional. And what happens? Biden's administration throws a temper tantrum and says, "See, this is why we need to clean up the Supreme Court and put it all put it all." Yeah, we got to pack it all with Democrats, who will be yes men. And I'm like, people, do you really not are listening to yourself?
Yeah, well, and the idea of emergency powers is it's what the executive can do while the legislative, Congress or the state legislature, whatever you're talking about, has a chance to get together and do something about it. So it's like, a few days or whatever, maybe a little longer if they're out of session. But when you consider that Pearl Harbor was December 7th, and they declared war against Japan on the 8th. So, that's how quickly Congress can act if they get a mind to it. But look at how long it took them to act on so many things while they were busy, impeaching the president who wasn't the president anymore. And
oh yeah, Yeah, that's another funny thing too. It's like they were still trying to impeach Donald Trump, and it's like, people, Donald Trump's no longer in office.
Yeah,
Office,
but
you know.
but it's like it's been what, a year and a half more now. Emergency powers don't last that long. You know, that's been
Yeah.
plenty of time for Congress and state legislatures to get together and figure things out.
And, you know, and you can tell it's clearly a power grab and not in the public health, because here's the thing, you know, when a reliable vaccine came out for COVID-19, did the government say, "Oh, we got a vaccine now, so we're all safe." Okay, you guys, okay, we lift up the embargoes and all that. You guys can do what you want now. No, they kept cracking it down, saying, "Oh no, there's a Delta strand. Oh, there's a Delta strand now." And they're like,
Mhm.
well, actually, the vaccine still offers reasonable protection from the Delta strain. Well, we're gonna block it off just in case,
Yep.
because it might mutate again.
And Hawkeye, I believe if I remember correctly, he lives in BC. He says, our PM has never been less popular, and our Conservative Party still can't remove him from power because their leader thinks that beating Trudeau by being Trudeau is a winning play. And that's the thing. If you want to compete with somebody, you can't just be a clone of them, because then people are just going to vote for Trudeau. You have to be someone distinctly different from them. So,
Yeah.
that was always the problem with, we can get success in the Libertarian Party by having Republicans running. Well, then people don't have any reason to vote Libertarian. They'll just vote Republican.
Yeah.
If that's all they're going to get from Libertarians.
And to be fair, part of the problem is, from what I've heard, there actually are like legitimate, genuine libertarians already in the federal government. And you know what the federal government does? They basically say, yeah, Senator / Representative Libertarian, just go to take your seat, don't talk, let the big boys talk.
I think now the only one who's really close is Justin Amash.
Yeah.
He's not even what I would call a full-on libertarian, but he's pretty close at least.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I've actually heard like there used to be many more, quasi-libertarians in like the Senate and the House of Representatives, but they're leaving because it's kind of became fruitless. Every time they tried to bring up, their policy, basically Congress or whatever would literally sweep them under the rug and say, yeah, whatever, go back to your chair, stop talking.
Isn't that what Ron Paul did? He basically went, well, this isn't productive, and just straight up left.
Yeah. He was like the one person voting no to a lot of these bills, and he'd introduce bills and they'd quietly kill them in committee and things like that. So Hawkeye is going to have to tell us what PPC is, but he says the PPC was locked out of the debates because he humiliated them last time, and he's the only candidate against mandates. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's the same thing all over. The government is in charge of elections, and it's the people who are elected who write the laws that govern the elections. So why is it any surprise that they're going to write the laws that favor the way that they get elected?
Yeah.
This is the problem with trying to secure voting systems, whether it's voting machines or like all the stuff we're seeing now with the signature variations or things like that. The people who benefited from whatever fraud or anything there may or may not have been in the last election, which of course I have to say, for the sake of YouTube, there is absolutely no evidence for any of that. But, theoretically, anyone who benefited from that got elected. So what incentive do they have to fix it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's another really sad thing too that I've recently read about. Our founding fathers actually predicted something like this would happen. If I recall correctly, there was actually an attempt early in the day to actually flat out ban political parties, but it failed because many politicians were members of a political party, and if we ban political parties, then we're not going to get our quote unquote donations.
Yeah. Hawkeye clarifies this: People's Party of Canada, a libertarian populist party who's the only non-commie party. Yeah, that's what they would do. And JC has a question for Pip. In Australia, do you know how many protests are happening over there?
I only really know of the big one concerning the Construction Workers Union, which has gotten all over the news. Any other protest, I don't know. mainly because the media will not cover anything like that unless it actually goes viral.
Yeah, so what's going on with the construction workers?
Oh, the construction workers, because the construction workers themselves oppose mask and vaccine mandates, but the construction workers union supports it. So the construction workers protest outside the union building, and then because that's a big protest that's really noticeable, a lot of people find out, and then media immediately goes into damage control, claiming that these people aren't real construction workers and all the rest of that. And it basically just snowballs.
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, the union has no incentive whatsoever to actually represent the workers.
Oh, the CFMEU, which is the Construction Workers Union, they're a major power player in the Labour Party, so they're directly attached to a political party. Like a lot of people in America don't understand that our Labour Party is essentially the union's party.
It's literally a labor party.
Yeah.
Which, not for nothing, is what the Nazi Party was. So.
Yep. Oh yeah, speaking of which, I've been watching this guy called TIK. I think it stands for something, but I just call him Tick, and he does a lot of videos of World War II, and I love him because he proves with documented backed up facts that everything you were taught about World War II and the Nazi Party in high school is 100% wrong.
Yeah. Well, you could say that about the Civil War too, and
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, basically that's what I've noticed with a lot of, looking back on the history we were taught. We were either completely 100% wrong, or we only gave a very, very bad spark notes of someone who barely read it. Like, I mean, a perfectly good example, and this does pertain to the Civil War, is when people, claim, the Civil War was 100% about slavery. It's like, well, what's your proof? Well, it says here in the Declaration of Secession by these states saying we want slavery. And yeah, there were some states that said slavery, being pro-slavery was one of their reasons. But what they leave out is that it was one of like the hundreds and hundreds of reasons they were leaving, including stuff like, we're sick and tired of these high taxes. We're tired of these tariffs. We're tired of federal troops being deployed in our towns and basically ruling the place, and we're tired of, of our concerns being ignored in Congress.
Yep.
Yeah, all they care about is, they said they're pro-slavery. That means it's 100% behind slavery. That's another thing too. I mean,
the only one I've really looked into is North Carolina, my home state, but it's interesting how, you have the division set up, and when you look at this, and you see similar things in other states, but like in North Carolina, you have kind of like the Piedmont where I am, and over in the mountains where, I mean, you had to be the richest of the rich to afford slaves. Most of them were over on the eastern part of the state, and so the state was really kind of divided on that. So when they got together, when all the other states were seceding and said, hey, do we secede over the slavery issue? They ended up not doing it. Like, no, we're not going to secede. And it was only later on when the North started sending troops down, they were like, okay, this is ridiculous. We gotta switch sides here.
Yeah, Do you think secession is possible in this day and age? It's more. I wouldn't say, hey, it's as easy as it used to be, but it's more popular. But it's more possible than people realize. Like, so many people think it's like, oh no, it's impossible because now we have nukes and all that. And I love how someone, I forgot who it was, posted that meme showing it's like, yeah, you used a nuke and you destroyed the radicals' home along with all the other people's homes, including the homes and buildings that would have proven useful to your occupying force, but now they're not useful because they're blown up.
And can you think of a better way to get people on the side of the secessionists?
Yeah,
Yeah. And Hawkeye also points out that slavery was a government program. If the state wanted to end it, all they'd have to do is stop subsidizing and it would die off. Yeah, you had the Fugitive Slave Acts, for example. That's
if I recall correctly, that's basically how Britain outlawed slavery. They didn't necessarily pass a law that outlawed it. They basically just said, listen, we'll still allow slavery, but we're no longer going to subsidize it. So if a slave runs away from you, I'm sorry, we're not going to send troops or marshals to capture them for you. You got to do that on your own. And eventually they got tired. of it, and they're like, you know what, fine. They're worth more trouble than they're worth. Let's stop enslaving people.
Yeah, they also bought a lot of the slaves back from, and there weren't that many people in Britain itself who owned slaves. It was pretty much the colonies where that was. What is your deregulation defense on the Florida building collapse? Well, regulations didn't prevent it.
Yeah.
So why do we need to defend our side when something horrible happened with their side?
Yeah. And another thing too that so many people blame on deregulation, it's like, especially we saw this during the Bush administration, like everyone said deregulation caused this. Another perfect example is when people blamed Bill Clinton's deregulation for that massive economic collapse that occurred in the late 1990s. And when you look it up, the so-called deregulation was they repealed some rules, but not all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, Peter Schiff pointed that out. He's like, they ended this, it's like, that was caused because that was the day, Congress, repealed, this one rule, I forgot which precise one it was, but it was about, managing and accounting regulations. And it's like, and he was like, yeah, but that was just like one out of the hundreds of rules they already had in the book, and none of those rules were repealed.
Yep. And Hawkeye mentions that that's a take that did not age well after the outcome of Afghanistan. Yeah. I mean, that was a foreign country where everyone was quote unquote the enemy. And they didn't even do that there. Why would they do it in their own country? It's a dumb take.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We know what you were saying, Hawkeye. We got you.
Yeah.
I read Taiwanese.
Yeah, really the only reason we still have nuclear weapons is because, quote unquote, it's because other nations have nuclear weapons, and if they are going to blow us up, we got to destroy the world so they won't blow us up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a dumb take from the start.
It's like in Slaughterhouse 5, where like those aliens have a weapon where the main character encounters those aliens that have a weapon that's capable of blowing up an entire planet, including their own. And they're like, dude, why the hell would you invent such a weapon that would kill your own people and cause mass destruction? And their argument is because if we don't build one, our enemies will build one, and we can't have our enemies having one when we don't have one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from what I've heard,
this was before the development of nukes. They were able to do a lot of destruction in World War II without nukes.
Yeah, I've actually heard from some people in Japan that have actually flat out said that believe it or not, a lot of Japanese, weren't really too impacted by the atomic bomb simply because, and people were like, really? Why was that? It's like, because you got to remember, prior to dropping the atomic bomb, the United States was dropping napalm, and believe it or not, there are many, famous images that they show you of the quote unquote atomic bomb, and they say, oh, look how destruction this was, but it turns out those photos were actually from Tokyo after it was firebombed with just napalm.
Yep. And Naruto is saying people attack 3 Mile Island for deregulation. That's nonsense. It wasn't deregulated at all. But I do want to mention the Illinois Energy Prof channel. It's a professor. I can't think of the guy's name off the top of my head, but he's with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he's got videos on 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima and all sorts of videos on how different kinds of reactors work and things like that. And I have no idea who Prax Ben is, but
And as Hawkeye pointed out, 3 Mile Island was a success story. Like, if I recall correctly, 3 Mile Island, as well as Fukushima, they were worst case scenarios that you don't want to happen, but they were contained.
Yeah, and the reason why Chernobyl was so bad is because socialists are stupid and they didn't build a containment building. I mean, there were a lot of things that went wrong, but even after all of the other things went wrong, if they had just had a stupid containment building around it, even with that massive explosion, it wouldn't have even cracked it. Because you're talking about 3 meter thick steel reinforced concrete.
The problem is they did make a containment building. However, because of material delivery
After the
delays,
fact,
nearly as long.
After it already blew and spewed radiation everywhere.
When they were building Reactor 4, which was the reactor that went up, there were delays in material for the reinforcement, and especially with fire suppression, because they designed it to have fire suppressant materials built into the materials they were building with the building. But those materials,
but I don't think that would have helped. When you look at the magnitude of that explosion, I don't think that would have helped. You need a proper containment building, which they didn't have. They didn't design into it. They weren't going to make.
Well, and another thing,
and the USSR, the Soviet Union, was the only country on the planet that built nuclear reactors without containment buildings.
Another thing, too, that about Chernobyl that often doesn't get talked about is, well, yes, it was a terrible disaster and an example of what not to do. When you actually look at the grand scheme of things, it didn't do much damage. A lot of people said it's like, oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. It killed hundreds of people and it's going to leak radiation and thousands more will die of cancer and all that. But it turns out only 86 people died, almost all of which were fire-related deaths. And And even then, the radiation, and all that wasn't as bad as people said. You hear stories about how...
Yeah, I think there's just going to be like a few hundred cancer cases they're saying now instead of the thousands they were initially predicting.
And there's also stories like you've heard of the elephant's foot, where they're like, oh yeah, it's this melted pile of pile of irradiated metal, and it's so radioactive that being within close proximity will kill you. Yet there's pictures of people studying it, and all of those people are alive and well, and they don't have no long-term consequence, and they're not even wearing full-blown hazmat suits. They're just wearing masks and surgical gloves.
Well, because they're directly outside the containment building they made after the fact to try to closing the barn door closing the barn door after the horses have exploded everywhere. Yeah.
Well, the thing about the elephant's foot is, to my knowledge, only one person has died due to exposure to the elephant's foot, and that was the person who took the original photograph immediately after the Chernobyl disaster happened.
Yeah.
You can go stand in the same room as it because that's the thing about half-lives. Once something has gone past one half-life, it outputs half as much radiation because there's half as much radioactive material there.
Right.
Yeah, and here's another thing too. The only reason Pripyat looks the way it is today is not because of the radiation. It's because the Soviet government said that everyone had to leave, but they wouldn't let them go back in, even though it's actually been proven that radiation levels are safe and people can go back in the zone. They don't allow it except for a very limited number of people. And as consequence, the cities and buildings rotted. And now a lot of people aren't going back because they determined that it would be too expensive to rebuild everything.
Yeah. They're doing the same crap with Fukushima. They have all these people living in refugees for the last 10 years for no reason. And that is causing far more deaths and health problems than would have happened if they had never done an evacuation in the first place.
Oh yeah, Fukushima. I mean, there was that one Canadian scientist that said, okay, we've done data, and we found out that Fukushima will not cause any long-term environmental damage, so we can all breathe a sigh of relief. And instead, everyone said, "Reed, that doesn't fit the narrative. We wanted to hear that it was gonna cause an environmental cataclysm."
Yeah, they actually sent him death threats.
Yeah.
And again, real death threats, not the SJW kind of death threats.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one person who died from Fukushima, and it wasn't even from the radiation. Yeah. I think it was a heart attack.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, the overwhelming majority of people that did die at Chernobyl, they didn't die from radiation. They died from either they were blown to bits by the explosion, or they died, from burns or smoke inhalation from the following fire.
Yeah, I have no idea about this British railway failure thing.
Oh, that's the problem is that most people think of when someone says privatization is they created a private market, but the British Railway failed because no private market was created. They effectively just handed monopoly licenses to various railway companies and expected it to work perfectly. And anyone who can hear can tell you why that's not going to work.
No, Angel, COVID is not a hoax. I have no idea why anyone would have planned Fukushima, considering how freaking expensive a failure it was.
How do you plan a tsunami?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of tsunamis,
and if they were going to do it, and they were really going to plan it out, why wouldn't they do it at Onagawa, which was closer to the epicenter of the earthquake and got hit harder by the tsunami?
Yeah, I remember also reading that. That's another thing people fail to realize. They always talk about how Fukushima is proof that if an environmental, disaster occurs, a power plant will erupt and it'll become bad and all that. But, you said there were actual nuclear power plants that were closer to the epicenter and actually took a lot more damage, and they didn't, explode or have fires or stuff like that.
And it was really that nothing happened to the nuclear reactors. It took out, because it was set up where if there was an earthquake, the reactors would automatically shut down. Turns out, if they hadn't had that in there, everything would have been fine. But what happens is when you shut down the reactors, because the reactors power their own coolant, because it was a BWR, not a PWR like we have here in the States. When you cut out the reactor, you cut out the power to the coolant, so you need diesel generators as a backup to keep the coolant going while you get everything else back up and running. Well, the tsunami took out the diesel generators, and it was pretty much a fluke from what I've been able to tell. I mean, not really anything anyone could have predicted, but the diesel generators were taken out. They have batteries to back up the diesel generators, and the batteries will keep you going like 6 or 8 hours or something like that, which is long enough, generally speaking, to get in something like, oh, we need to just ship in some emergency diesel generators or something else, get something else going to get that coolant going. But all of the surrounding infrastructure had been destroyed by the earthquake and the tsunami. No trucks were running anywhere. No one could get anywhere to deliver everything. Streets were still, not blocked and not destroyed, were clogged up with everyone trying to evacuate. So, yeah. So then there wasn't any coolant going through.
And also, I'm sorry, Angel, but granted, for YouTube's sake, we'll say, there's no evidence that that COVID-19 was man-made. But here's another thing: even if it was, it wasn't meant to be a biological weapon. That's another thing that people fail to realize. People that are saying that COVID-19 is man-made, they're not saying, oh, it was made because the Chinese were trying to create a biological weapon to wipe us all out. No, it's a common thing that happens, where, like you said, where we deliberately make a disease more infectious so we can study it and develop better drugs to fight it, and vaccines.
Well, because you got to understand that twice before, a bat coronavirus turned into a really bad human disease, and that was with SARS and MERS. So it makes sense that virology labs are going to want to study it.
Yeah.
And, while I can't say that it was a lab escape, at least can we investigate? Can we ask the question? Can we look for evidence and see? Because yes, the prior probability is on a natural zoonotic transfer from bats, or indirectly through pangolins or whatever. But you don't just go with the priors. You got to say, okay, well, that's what we're going to go with for now, but we need to collect evidence to be able to tell for sure. So got to get the evidence.
Yeah, and like I said,
what do you mean COVID-19 was ever isolated? We have pictures of SARS-CoV-2. There are pictures of it. Yes, it was isolated. We have the genes. You can go online. There are places where they have posted free for anyone to just go onto and see the entire RNA sequence. It's all there.
Yeah,
and no, Cuba did not make a vaccine to lung cancer.
Yeah, making a vaccine to cancer, that's actually kind of impossible. I mean, even the quote unquote, but what about that? But what about, that vaccine that protects you against, testicular and cervical cancer? No, that only protects you against HPV, which can theoretically cause cancer.
No, Angel, there are actually pictures through transmission electron microscopes, not computer models, pictures from transmission electron microscopes, actual pictures of the actual virus.
Yeah.
It exists. Deal with it.
And here's another thing, going back with Corona, even if it is a lab leak, I don't think it's like what a lot of people think it is. Like, it's like, oh yeah, it was created like that. No, it wasn't deliberately leaked. It was just, because there was reports of this. It was just good old fashioned human stupidity,
Well, because normally if you look at virology labs, they just have such a culture of safety. They go through hell and high water. Anything even remotely, possible that you might be infected, and you're in separate quarantine room for 3 days at least. But apparently the Wuhan lab, and this is something we actually do know for sure, it isn't quite up to snuff on a lot of those safety issues. And so one way or the other, that's something that needs to be improved there.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned, and they did show, and they did have proof of this. There were cases of, people studying, these infected animals getting bitten by them, and all that happened was they gave them like a vaccine for like a previous known disease, and are like, okay, you can go home and all that, but not actually keeping them there, saying, okay, we got to make sure, you don't develop, any, it doesn't mutate and you develop any infection. And that's actually what some people believe what actually happened, is that probably, if it was a lab leak, it was probably some workers there. They got bitten or got exposed, to an animal that had it, and rather than taking the proper procedures, they're just like, okay, we gave you the vaccine for the usual zoonotic diseases. Go home, have a good day. And sure enough, they fall ill, and they think, oh, it's just a cold. I'll be fine.
Well, the theory
you're not supposed to make assumptions like that when you work in a virology lab.
Yeah.
Well, the theory that I've heard that I find the most plausible is that someone was given specimens and told to take them to the incinerator, and they thought, well, there's nothing wrong with these. I'll just go, I'll make a quick buck by selling it on the open market. And that's how it got into the wet market.
Yeah.
I think it was probably just someone at the lab got sick, thought it was just a cold, and went out.
That's what I was saying. I'm pretty sure someone just got exposed to like one of the bats or pangolins they were experimenting on. They got sick and they thought, oh, it's just a cold. I'll be fine. So they did the usual stuff that normally goes there.
And that has happened. That's happened like 5 or 6 times, I think, in the last 50 years or something like that. It hasn't created like this global pandemic, but there was like one. No, it wasn't the previous SARS. It was one of the. Oh, I think it might have been avian flu. The same lab, I believe it was working on a vaccine, and the vaccine type virus that they were developing to make the vaccine, the weakened strain, got out into the wild. So yes, there have been lab escapes. They happen. So it's not like some, impossible thing. It's more probable that there's a zoonotic origin, because that happens a lot. You're talking about something that happens thousands of times a year versus something that's happened a handful of times in the last half century. But it happens. And it's not impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, I was watching a documentary about tuberculosis, and I've actually heard not too long ago they actually finally tracked out where tuberculosis came from in primitive humans, and they believe it actually was, and they believe it was actually transmitted to humans through cows or other herd animals when we started herding.
Yep. And Gnostic talks about there's nothing in the COVID virus that indicates it's man-made. That's when you're talking about, people who are doing like actual, genetic cut and pasting and designing genes or taking genes from one and putting them in another. There's no evidence of anything like that, but it may have been that they were doing tests, with human tissue to see the different ways the bat coronavirus can evolve. And they did get a way for it to just evolve naturally in that environment in a way that can infect humans, again, for the purposes of studying it in case something like that does happen again. And, labs all over the world were studying that. This is something everyone wants to know about. But I mean, I've actually, even before COVID, I was hearing some scientists, even virologists and immunologists saying, yeah, we just shouldn't have virology labs. They should not exist because the chance of something like that happening, I mean, it may be small, but if it does happen, it can be devastating. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard the guy, you know, that developed the smallpox vaccine. He flat out says, it's like, listen, guys, smallpox is no longer a threat. And if it does, for whatever reason, magically appear, we can develop a vaccine for it. Why do we still have it in a lab where although it's tightly secured, there's still that risk that it could leak, or someone with malicious intentions could, you know, steal it? You know, why do we still have it? We should take the remaining samples we have and throw it in an incinerator. Yeah, the guy who developed the smallpox vaccine said that. He said, listen, yeah, we know how to make a vaccine now. If it does pop up again, we can make a vaccine for it. There's no
Well,
reason
I mean, you can take the remaining samples and sequence their genome, and we know how to make, because that's how the COVID vaccine was developed. They just used they didn't have the when they developed the vaccine, they didn't have to have a virology lab on their own. They just contacted one of the labs that had isolated it and said, hey, send us the RNA code for the spike protein. And they just emailed it to them. And that's what you do. You take it, and then you can print out the RNA sequence from there as messenger RNA, put it in the vaccine. So, I don't really think it was selective breeding. I think it was just putting them in that environment to see what happened, which is different from selective breeding, like with dogs, where you're trying to get particular traits or whatever. And they're not selling the viruses on the internet. There's all sorts of places where you can go to look up all sorts of genome sequences. You can look at human genomes, you can look at chimpanzee genomes, you can look at all sorts of viruses and bacteria. And there's just all sorts of stuff where you can find this publicly available because it's public domain.
Yeah, contrary to what some, you know, medical throws like to say, you can't actually buy a quote-unquote virus off the internet. Typically what I've heard, what you buy is you just get like a sequence for it, and they're often used for medical labs, you know. Yeah. And even if it is an actual virus or bacteria, it's dead or inactive.
Well, and it's usually... it might just be part of it. Like it might just be, you know, the spike protein or whatever, or it might have some stuff. Like you can get HIV with the nasty stuff taken out, where it's just your basic retrovirus, and download that. And if you have the right know-how and equipment, you can use that to develop a retroviral therapy without having to actually work with HIV itself in your own lab. So it's amazing some of the things they can do.
I've actually heard that's an interesting thing about viruses is that, you know, the shocking part is that, like, the viron itself, the thing that infiltrates your cell and causes you to get sick because it makes your cell print copies of itself instead of its function. That itself is actually not the problem with viruses. The problem is, like you said, the spike protein, because that's the part that's actually quote unquote alive, and it's reproducing and protecting the viron from being protected, because the viron on its own, your immune system would destroy it almost instantly. You know, it's actually the spike protein that's the problem, because the spike protein, like you said, is the thing that prevents antibiotics from sticking to... I mean, not antibiotics, antibodies from sticking to it, so it can't, you know, because that's how your immune system fights it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm muted. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I was saying I just hit Angel from the channel because that's what I was doing. That's why I was muting, because it's like talking to a brick wall. And I was just saying that the video I have where I go over the ingredients of the vaccine, I cover just how many people in your area, wherever you are. There would have to be hundreds of people in on any conspiracy. where if they were putting anything funky in the vaccine, or if it was something other than what anyone said it was, or anything like that, there'd be no way they could keep that quiet. There would be whistleblowers all over the place. So one of the things I deleted was, Angel claiming that he or she had gone into all these court cases and gotten it proved. It's like, yes, cite me the court case and then we'll look at it and talk. But and some people, Rainbow, actually might need 3 jabs, but it's just, I got another video on this. Your immune response to a virus or a vaccine or something like that is very individualized. And if you've got immune system that's kind of stronger than most, you might only need 1 jab. If you've got immune system that's weaker than most, you might need 3. But it just talk to your doctor. That's the advice on it. Talk to your doctor. Your doctor knows your situation and can give you the best advice on that.
Yeah. And granted, this is kind of COVID related, but apparently Colin Powell died a couple days ago.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny
I don't want anyone to die, but I'm not shedding too many tears on that because I'm holding that guy responsible for every single death in the Iraq War. Yeah. He knew it was bullshit from the start. All he had to do was say one word and say, look, we know Iraq doesn't have WMDs, because we knew that at the time. He could have stopped it with a single sentence, and he decided to go along with it. Oh, Angel is Turtle? Okay, that explains a lot. I didn't know that was Turtle.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
In space,
okay, everything falls into place now. Yeah.
Yeah. In space, no one can hear you scream. Yeah, it's pretty funny because...
Unless you've got a radio in your spacesuit and someone's receiving it.
Well, yeah, and contrary to popular belief, I've actually heard is that, sound does occur and it does get generated in space. It's just that traditional sound just can't travel in a vacuum.
Well, there's no medium. All you need is some kind of medium for it to go through. So if your radio's out, but you can make contact with the other astronaut, what you can do is touch your helmets together so that they're contacting. Now, you're still going to have to yell really loud for the other person to hear you. But as long as they're making contact, the sound can go across into the other spacesuit. I mean, it'll be muffled. It'll be, But it can happen. You just have to set it up right.
Yeah. And speaking of space, I watched this really cool video where they actually, and this is the ultimate proof once and for all that kind of debunks, the conspiracy that we landed on the moon, that we faked the moon landing. There was actually a guy who was an expert in cinematography and the history of cinematography. And what he did was he looked at using the current technology for cinema that they had in 1969, if they were truly to fake the moon landing and get it as realistic as possible without a scientist pointing out, hey, that's incorrect, that would be staged, it would actually cost more to fake it than to actually land on the moon.
Yeah.
See, the moon landings were staged, but the director insisted on filming on location.
Yeah, that's a joke. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like I'm sorry, I want to actually film on the moon.
Filmed on location, yeah. I mean, they can't even get it right today. I mean, if you look at the big high budget blockbuster movies like Gravity, which I loved, by the way, I'm not really crapping on the movie, but they didn't get any of the zero gravity or the orbital mechanics or anything correct. I mean, it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just if you look at actual footage from the space station and you see actually how things behave in zero gravity, you can tell the difference. But it's really hard to do in an Earth gravity. Even with today's technology, it's really, really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And we've talked plenty of times about the internet and how it was created.
Yeah, the government didn't really create it. I mean, they created something like that was like a proto of the internet, but no, the internet as it exists today in its current form, even from the beginning, it was all private companies.
Yeah, and Interstellar, yeah, and ordinarily you go through a black hole and you die, but the image of the black hole they did is real. They had, I think it was Kip Thorne, they had helping them with that, and they put all this data on black holes into a supercomputer to figure out how it would work, and I've tried recreating it in Blender, and I've got the idea of how it should work. I just can't make it work because the thing is, you see that part that kind of warps up to the top. What you're seeing is the accretion disk, and the disk goes around it. But that curvy part up at the top is the back part of the accretion disk that you're seeing because of gravitational lensing that warps through the black hole. Now, if you had an actual lens like a glass ball or crystal ball or something. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, Interstellar. Hey, Executioner. But if you have that, you have a consistent index of refraction between glass and air, or in this case, glass and the vacuum of space. It would be like 1.33 or something like that. The issue with this is it's variable towards the edge of the event horizon. From your point of view, the edge, it would be an IOR of 1, and it would increase basically to infinity as you get to the center. And I've tried setting it up in Blender, and I can sort of get it to work, but the physics of it are just persnickety. But it's kind of fun. I'm trying to do a Fresnel effect on it.
Power issue.
I'm trying to vary the IOR based on the Fresnel effect to try and change that as it comes in. And
actually, Shane, I saw something funny about the film Interstellar because I had a friend, whose father-in-law was a biologist and all that, and he was. And can I say something? Finish real quick, that Executioner.
Sorry.
He was a microbiologist. Now, granted, he was a biochemist, but he was fascinated by astronomy and all that, so he knew what he was talking about. And he said, what's funny about Interstellar? They got a lot of stuff scientifically correct, about how black holes work. But there's one thing that they really messed up with science, is that the reason they're going there is because Earth is becoming uninhabited because of blight, because of this blight that's like immune to all the traditional measures, and it's super effective and it's spreading quickly. And he's like, listen, in real life, if a blight like that was that powerful, it would die out before it had a chance to spawn globally.
The undefined slope of the space-time would break the system. Well, that's actually why I'm having to kind of fake it using the Fresnel effect.
I mean, that's and he actually says that's a pet peeve that drives him in a lot of those movies. It's like, oh, there's this super bug and it's making the world go extinct. Listen, it's been proven there has never been a single case of a species going extinct because of a disease. Yes, pockets of populations have wiped out, but a species as a whole has never been wiped out. And you want to know why? Because evolutionary speaking, it is possible to be too successful. If you're this super virus, that you're immune to antibodies, you're immune to every this, you'll kill everything in an instant. You'll burn yourself out before you even have a chance to spread.
Mataba.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Ebola. Ebola is a really bad virus, but it burns itself out very quickly.
That's
reason.
why I'm sorry.
Too many people.
Yep.
That's why I'm sorry, Stephen King, but Captain Trips in The Stand in real life would not cause the end of the world, because that's just it. It's so perfect. It would have killed everyone before they even had a chance to get off the base.
Yeah, bubonic plague didn't even kill everyone in the areas where it was hit, because a lot of people had a natural immunity. They had a mutation that protects it against the bacteria attaching to the CCR5 receptor, which is how it was able to attack the immune system. So, okay, then JC also wants to know, what do you think would be more likely to be colonized first, the moon or Mars? I think it kind of depends on what you mean by a colony. But if you mean a place where people would not just go to work, but to live and to make a life, I think it's going to be Mars. But I think along the way, you will have a permanent or at least a rotating population on the moon to set up as kind of a way station, because it's a lot easier to launch things off the moon than to try to get it out of the gravity well, of Earth. And so you can actually mine resources on the moon or from nearby asteroids take them there to the moon and set things up, and from there launch them onto Mars without having to launch it all from the surface of the Earth, which is this huge amount of energy it takes to get out of Earth's gravity.
Yeah, once you're out of Earth, once you're in Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that like the halfway point to the moon in terms of energy is just that very low Earth orbit. And if you're in any orbit above that, it takes less energy to go from there to the moon than it does to go from the Earth to there.
Yeah, I've actually heard like some moon landing conspiracy theorists love to say it's like, I don't get it. How come the Apollo missions needed these super big rockets to get to the moon, but they could easily get there from themselves? It's because, like you said, the moon and space have much weaker gravity, so there's not much. The reason we need those big rockets is because you have to get out of Earth's gravitational pull, and you need big rockets like that.
Well, and also they asked back when the space shuttle was going, oh, why can't the space shuttle go to the moon? Well, put a space shuttle next to a Saturn V and look at how little fuel it has. Because I feel the way it works. When you see that big Saturn V rocket, that teeny tiny little tip at the top was the part that went to the moon. The part that's under that is the fuel that got it to the moon. The part that's under that is the fuel that got that fuel to the moon. And then the part under that is the part that got that fuel to the moon, and so on. And so the more delta V you need to get to where you're going, you need more and more fuel, because you're not just accelerating that mass a greater amount, which you are. You'll need to do that. But that fuel also has mass, and then you've got to get that mass into orbit with more fuel, and then that fuel has mass, and it just snowballs.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the space shuttle itself, it was never intended to fly to the moon and back. It was designed for launching, space missions above Earth's atmosphere. That's it.
Yeah, low to medium Earth orbit. Yeah, it can't even go out to like the Clark Belt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also why rockets have stages.
Yeah,
because you want to get rid of that weight as soon as possible.
Yeah, because that first stage itself, the container for all that fuel is mass. Get rid of that mass, and then launch the next one.
It's like you wonder why almost every single stage to orbit design people have come up in the game Kerbal Space Program. It's almost always some form of plane, because you really need to push for every single efficiency gain you can, because wasted space and weight is a no-no.
It's the dumbest argument I've ever heard. Oh, sorry, Executioner.
So I'm reading the Communist Manifesto, and I'm doing a reading of it. And Frederick Engels, I read the preface. Takes you like 15 minutes to get into it, and how long-winded Frederick Engels was. He's
actually worse than Ayn Rand.
Oh yeah, so many people complain. Yes, so many people complain about how F.A. Hayek and all the others, they use these big words and big sentences. There's no way the common people can read it. Yet I've heard people say, it's like, listen, read the Communist Manifesto, Yeah.
I mean, I think Hayek is a lot better than Mises in that regard. Mises's books are good, but you don't want to cut your teeth on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rothbard's pretty good.
Yeah, Rothbard is a lot more of an easier read, and some of his, like The Case Against the Fed, I got that and I sat down and read it in part of an afternoon, and I got all the way through it. So,
yeah, I like Thomas Woods, to be honest. I've read his. I think it's the Politically Incorrect Guide to American History and 33 Questions You're Not Supposed to Ask, and it's pretty good. I grew up in New England. I grew up on Cape Cod, and I actually learned some things that I never knew about the Pilgrims and stuff like that, and many misconceptions that I was taught in school. In fact,
his books read like, just a guy you're casually talking to on the other side of the dinner table or something like that. They're just the language of it is really, of the people. It's not really formalized or anything like that. It's just he's just talking to you.
Yeah, my favorite misconception about the Pilgrims, and we covered it a long time ago on a Thanksgiving live stream, and is that the colony almost failed because of the bad weather and the poor farming conditions. No, the reason why it almost failed was because when the Puritans
because of socialism.
Yeah, they basically set up a Christian form of communism.
That's why it's called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And one thing I did
Commonwealth
learn
has a lot of meanings. It doesn't necessarily mean like a little commie state like what they tried to make.
Yeah. What I learned from the book I'm reading is kind of like how so I asked it a while ago because I was at work, but so we all learn about Squanto, and there's a misconception that it was a Northeastern Native American technique to use fish as a fertilizer, even though there was a paper by Lynette Cece and others who went into that and goes, no, Squanto was well-traveled. He had traveled to England. He had traveled to Spain because he was a slave for a while, and he had traveled to Newfoundland. So it's more likely he learned the fish technique from the Europeans as opposed to it being a native technique. Like, there's no evidence to suggest that fish was used east of the Mississippi. And yet everybody's taught in school that if it wasn't for Squanto, then the Pilgrims would have been gone the way of Roanoke.
I'm looking at my VU meter. When other people are talking, is it leaking out of my headphones? Let me know in the chat if there's anything leaking out. It might just be so quiet that you can't hear it. So
yeah, my internet connection is absolute. I
mean, you're coming through. You're coming through fine on mine. I'm just kind of worrying about it like it's leaking through my headphones into the microphone on my end.
Yeah.
Because this is a nice sensitive microphone. You can actually sit pretty far back from this microphone and it'll still pick you up pretty good. Yeah. Without sounding like you're far away.
You did a video on Plymouth Rock. You did a video on Plymouth Rock, Shane, and I grew up near where Plymouth Rock was, and I was actually surprised it was...
you mean where Plymouth Rock wasn't?
Didn't exist. Yeah. It was funny because I learned in school. I grew up where it was. I grew up on the Cape. I grew up in Massachusetts, and everybody and their mother tells that, even teachers from first grade, about this and that. You go to Plymouth Plantation on the bus, and everybody's like, "Oh, Plymouth Rock!" But I saw that video, and I'm like, "Huh? A crazy old guy just claimed it existed."
Yep. They didn't even land at Plymouth. Then they landed at like Provincetown, and then they just kind of took the ship. They just kind of took the ship around the shore until they got to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they landed in Providence. They found out it wasn't a good place to settle, so they went to Plymouth Bay, and they were actually originally on chart for Virginia, but they were blown off course to Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've actually read an interesting thing about, the history of the Puritans and all that, and I've actually heard with the Puritans, one reason why some people left, Plymouth and why they went back to England, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't because of the bad weather or because they hated or because they were dying, because it turns out that, well, yes, what was happening to the Pilgrims and the Puritans was wrong in England. The Puritans themselves were not these, people that wanted religious freedom. They wanted to set up their own, form of Christian state and
theocracy.
Yep.
Yeah, and their rules in many areas were worse than the rules that the Anglican Church in England had.
Yeah. There is a misconception though that the Puritans ended up stealing all the land pretty much. It's weird because there was a legal system where I think the Secession could go to and enforce their claim to their own land via property and stuff like that. I think Thomas E. Woods went over it, but Yeah, there definitely was theft of land, but it really is over exemplified. And there's we learned about the Pequot Wars, and the Pequot Wars is portrayed as the English colonizers massacring the Pequot tribe of Connecticut, when actually that's not the case. There were two native tribes allied with the I think it was one to the south, one to the north, and they were allied with the colony of Connecticut and Massachusetts Bay, and they ended up massacring the Pequots. But that's never taught in classrooms. It's
that's something that a lot of those people who are like 1/16 Native Americans say fail when they talk about the history between the United States and the native tribes. Is guess what? Many native tribes, they sold each other out all the time. Yeah, they had historical conflicts with these one tribes, and
and people make natives out to be like.
Well, and people also talk about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower, like that's the original Americans. My ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and that was the original. It's like Jamestown says hi.
Yeah. Yeah, Leif Erikson says hi.
Roanoke says hi.
Well, Leif Erikson didn't actually found a colony.
Yeah, he was in Canada, but believe it or not, there's actually now some genetic evidence, and they've done tests, like on people who claim to be 100%, native, First Nation, because we've been American Indian and all that, and they find out that actually there is Scandinavian European DNA in your blood, and it turns out it's because over 1,000 years ago, your great grandfather or grandmother married, had a relationship and had a child with one of the Vikings that decided, to stay at Leif Erikson and didn't go back with them, because not all the Vikings left. Many of them stayed, and they just integrated within the natives.
Well, most of them did, because back then the natives were just really formidable, and not even the Vikings could go through and plunder them. They kept getting their butts kicked. And it was only when, like 90% of the population was wiped out by a plague, that was why it took so long between 1492 and, 1605 for whatever that was, when they first came over. It was because over that century, and they don't even think it was like a single plague. They think it was like a bunch of different things that just blew through and killed off like 90% of the population. So now the European settlers get there, and there's all this empty space because all these tribes have died out. And the ones that are left have seriously dwindled numbers.
Makes me kind of mad is what makes me mad is when people try to portray natives as if there's an opening line from a Smithsonian book that says that, the Europeans aren't here yet. It's a pristine natural kingdom, even though we have evidence that, no, Native Americans engaged in slash and burn techniques to clear hundreds of acres of forest. And even then, every Paleolithic culture had techniques where they would take, I think it was mammoth, and run them off of a cliff, hundreds of them.
That's why they're like, they were so efficient, they used every part of a buffalo. No, they didn't, because that technique would kill, a dozen buffalo at one time. They could get through, maybe one or two before the meat rotted on the rest? They hunted. They used to be North American camels. The natives hunted them to extinction.
Oh yeah, and fun fact, we have archaeological evidence that in pre-colonial America, natives launched genocide. There's remains of cities and towns of pre-colonial natives that are wiped out, and there's tons of evidence showing that these people weren't wiped out by a plague or natural movement. They were invaded by another tribe, and most of their people were killed, and the rest were taken in and forced to be, wives of the conquerors.
The tribes near the Aztecs actually sided with the tribes near the Aztecs sided with the Spanish because they were so sick and tired of the Aztecs just freaking demolishing them.
Oh yeah, that's actually, I've actually heard that's actually why some natives actually sided with, the United States during the Wild West frontier, because, many of the tribes that were being targeted during that period, like the Sioux, they were very warlike and very tribal, and they were known to literally use, their horse riding to attack, to attack other tribes and take their stuff. And many of them were saying, we're tired of it. We want you guys to get rid of the Sioux. We don't care, if we're, if you're going to take the land, we just want them gone.
Yep.
Yeah. And even then, there are a lot of leftists who try to peddle the narrative that Native Americans did not have a concept of private property, which absolutely irritates me.
Yeah, and you know why we know that's not true? Because, fun fact, a lot of them did do that. In fact, believe it or not, when the European colonists first came to North America, many of the tribes were actually okay with them, and they actually figured out how to speak each other's languages and actually had treaties basically explaining, okay, here's what our property will be, here's how you acquire property, what if, we want to buy something from you, or vice versa, what to compensate for you with it.
Yeah. I grew up in Massachusetts, and the Wampanoag is the main tribe, and sure, there were abuses and so forth, but a lot of the times the stations were in charge of trading land with the Europeans, yet we never focus on, well, can we put some personal responsibility on the leadership for trading so much land away?
Yeah, I mean, even the Pilgrims, the Puritan Pilgrims, when they stopped being collectivistic and became more entrepreneurship, they actually had a document which they gave out to their civilians, basically explaining, here's how you deal with the natives, and it wasn't saying you got to kill them or convert them. It was saying, listen, if you want something from them, you got to give something in return. It doesn't have to be money. It can be something as simple as like giving them like an axe or something like that.
Yes, trade with them, and it's interesting because there's just a lot of misconceptions behind just the history, and I learned all those misconceptions in school as fact, and I look at it and I'm like, wow, this really is a disservice to Native Americans in general, because it portrays them as...
they were very diverse, sophisticated people that had all sorts of different ways of doing things. And, the popular view of them is to make them seem like all these, simple-minded kindergarteners and things like that.
Yeah, who the big evil bully.
Robert Reich did that with Egypt. Robert Reich did that with Egypt.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, and this actually is kind of contradiction, and this actually is kind of evidence against the Bible, we now know that contrary to popular belief, that while, yes, the Egyptians did have slaves and they did use them to build things, the pyramids were not one of them.
Yep.
And in all honesty,
slaves were mostly either they were household slaves, and there were, temple slaves and the slaves of the government. That was the kind of slavery they had. But, the jobs building the pyramids, those were cherished and coveted. People competed big for those jobs.
And in all honesty, and I heard one person point this out, when you really think of it, why would you want slaves building a pyramid? A pyramid, was holy to them. That was where the pharaoh and his ancestors were going to rest permanently, so you only wanted the best people to be working on it. You didn't want these starving, illiterate people who resent you, who might potentially sabotage it deliberately as a middle finger to you.
What would a peasant know about masonry,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
the sophisticated ways they had of basically floating limestones to the top,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they could have sabotaged it. That's a good point, SKM.
Yeah, that's what I was bringing up. Why would you trust, this very important and sacred, project to some people, who possibly hold a lot of resentment towards you, and they might think, you know what, we're sick and tired of doing this for the Egyptians. I have an idea. It says here we need a 3x3 block for this part. What if I accidentally made it a 3x4? And it ruins the whole structure. You don't want that.
What if, because limestone was worth a lot. What if, hey, I'm going to cut off a big chunk of limestone. run off with it, to a nearby country or something, and that'll be my fortune.
Yeah. Why would you have the Israelites, slaves, in charge of building practically a monument to their servitude? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Or ancient grain silos, like freaking Ben Carson tried saying.
Here's another fun fact about Egyptian pyramids. The workers were paid in beer. Yeah, they've actually deciphered evidence, and it basically said, what are you going to pay the workers? And from what I've read, a day's working on a period entitled you to, like, I think like 3 or 4 barrels of beer, and people are like, wow, they got paid in beer. It's like, well, yeah, because only the super rich and wealthy had gold. The average commoner and worker, would use
there wasn't enough gold to go around, basically, but beer and honey basically never went bad. They found honey in ancient Egyptian room. They found basically jars of honey that, you wouldn't want to eat them, but they're still kind of fresh.
They found wine bottles from 1800 that are still good, like 1700 steamboats.
Yep. That was the whole point of them. They did that because these people they didn't have refrigerators. They didn't can things.
Yeah. I've actually heard that, that's actually the thing, like, because we hear about, all this alcoholic stuff they drink, and so many people like to think it's like, wow, the ancient people sure were alcoholics. But from what I've read, they weren't putting alcohol in everything because they were drunks and they had to have their liquor. It was literally because putting a dash of alcohol in your drink, that was the only way to preserve it. That's the reason why sailors drink grog,
Well, and also they didn't understand this, but because they didn't know about bacteria or anything like that. But if you put a little bit of alcohol in it, then if it was tainted with anything bacterial that might make you sick, the alcohol would kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they knew about that, and they knew that they could use mold from the saddle, put it on their saddle sores, and cure that. Basically, antibiotics, penicillin.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually another thing.
Cheese was invented pretty much. Cheese was pretty much invented when somebody forgot milk in a satchel.
Yeah, and a lot of people, there's so many weird things, about how it's like, wow, when did people start eating this stuff? It's so gross and all that. Well, it's because back in those days, you had no choice. Like you said, I think that's the reason why cheese was invented. It was because, they left their milk out, but they can't get rid of it because that's all they have. And they're like, oh, well, might as well try to eat this stuff, but it didn't taste very good. So they added salt and maybe some seasoning. And they're like, hey, you know what? That doesn't taste bad, and then they started adding more and more. And over time, now we got cheese.
Well, and that's also why you have things like spicy foods and stuff like that, to cover up the taste of meat as it's going bad.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, fun fact. Yeah, there's actually, because I was watching this by Pete Townsend, who does, or no, not Townsend, not Pete Townsend. The Townsend and Sons. It's a YouTube cooking channel, and they talk about how they cooked in the 17th, 18th century, and
I love that channel.
Yeah, he did a Q&A episode, and they're like, are there any recipes you will never cook? And one of them was, there's actually a lot of recipes in these old cookbooks that basically say, hey, okay, you go to your store and your meat is covered with worms, it's green and it stinks. Here's how you can recover it and make it edible.
Just marinate it.
Yeah.
Just marinate it.
But it is not Pete Townsend. That's the guitarist for The Who.
Yeah, I know. I was stupid.
That popularized the windmill.
Yeah. But Townsend and Sons. Yeah, it's an interesting channel, believe it or not. And it's and another cool thing about the Townsend channel is that it actually shows that believe it or not, people of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, they weren't as crazy as we think they were, and they actually were somewhat sophisticated.
Oh yeah.
In particular, he did one special about.
There's one.
Well, even like pre pre-agricultural revolution tribes, in the Paleolithic, they were a lot more sophisticated than most people give them credit for.
Yeah,
There's this thing where it's buffalo fat mixed with something else. I can't remember it, but it was a Native American thing starting out, and they would take fat in the dried buffalo and they would grind it up, and it lasts for years.
Yeah, another historical misconception from schism is sexuality in ancient Rome. There's a lot of stuff that we used to be taught about Rome that we now know is actually completely false, and it was actually rewritten by the Christians, basically to say, yeah, Rome collapsed because they were wicked and they did all this stuff, when the reality is they did the exact
opposite. They were
opposite.
homosexuals.
Yeah, they became more puritanical, more socialist, more centralized, more authoritarian, yeah. They debased the currency and all that.
There's like a caveat to Rome being homosexual. It was really...
It was primarily bisexual, really, is what it was.
Yeah. And I've actually heard,
because bisexuality was considered the norm, and you were considered, I don't know if deviant would be the right word or whatever, but if you were either heterosexual or homosexual, they would see that you're kind of quite limited in your point of view, and there's something weird about that.
And I've actually heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've actually heard that they found like some diaries of like some Roman soldiers and all that, and apparently the reason why they would practice, why they would engage in, gay orgies wasn't because they were deviants, that slept with everything that moves. It's because they wanted to stay loyal to their wives at home, but they're men, and men have urges, but they don't want to risk, catching an STD from a native or fathering a bastard son, and they don't want to cheat on their wife. So what do? They say, well, we're just going to have to improvise.
Well, and also it was a way. It was a way of maintaining camaraderie as well, because you weren't just fighting with your fellow soldiers; you were fighting with your lovers.
Yeah, exactly. And I've actually heard that in some circles, being a bottom, to a soldier, that was also seen as a rite of passage too. The final rite of passion is that you have to learn to take it up there, because if you can handle taking it up that end, you're ready for anything.
Yeah, different cultures are weird.
Yeah, and to be fair, the principle of that model, we see that all the time. Like, for instance, I've read that, for instance, knights, often before they got initiated, it was actually not unheard of for the knight, to take his squire the night before he got knighted, and the knight would beat him up. And the whole point was to say, see, this is the final thing. You got to get beaten up by me, because if you can survive a beating by me, you will become you can handle anything.
Oh yes, JC, they had STDs. They absolutely had STDs.
Oh yeah,
they've always been with us.
Oh yeah, there's evidence.
Syphilis came from North America. That's the misconception. Like, there were disease transfers between the North American continent and Europe during Columbus. Syphilis originated in North America.
Oh yeah, and they did.
Yeah, it's just that the natives had developed an immunity to it. The Europeans had never encountered it, so they didn't have any kind of natural immunity, so they were more susceptible to it.
Yeah, there's tons of medical. I've read there's tons of medical literature we have from the ancient Roman times, and people who, the doctors said there were plenty of descriptions of diseases clearly showing, people complaining of, bumps, bruises, and ulcers in parts of your body that you can only get from sleeping with someone that has a condition like that.
Yeah, it's amazing what they can. I mean, it's just like everything that was ever depicted about Rome was wrong, because one of the things you see is like all the white marble and the white marble statues and the white marble columns, and
they were colored.
We know that now because they were able to do spectrographic analyses of it and find the leftover microscopic residues of organic molecules, and they know what pigments that corresponds to. And so they've been able to kind of digitally recreate
there was gold on top of the pyramid.
Oh man. And they think that's gone, all the way back to Paleolithic times, or even earlier. People just painted everything. They painted rocks, they painted trees, they painted, themselves and each other. They painted everything. The reason why we have cave paintings is because that was what survived. But I mean, you paint a rock and
Bob
the weather's
Ross,
gonna
your heart out.
What's that?
And
I said Bob Ross, eat your heart out.
Yeah. My favorite misconception also about not just with Rome, but with a lot of ancient civilizations is how, we see those statues and they've got, big breasts and deep, fake vaginas and all that. And for many years we thought, oh, this must be a symbol of fertility. This must be a fertility goddess that, women would go to and pray so they could conceive and all that. But then we actually find a way to translate the words and all that are on those statues. And it turns out, oh, it's just porn.
It's porn.
Yeah.
It's porn. Even before language was invented, it's pretty, it was their porn.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were statues, like North American statues, where it was obviously that, but people tried making it more complicated than it needed to be. Like, oh, this must be this god, and it's like, no. They
could be both. They could be both. Hell, ancient. Just look at ancient Egyptian mythology. That is half part, epic, romantic drama, and half part hardcore porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like the Venus de Milo, they find, because there wasn't any text accompanying the Venus de Milo. That was just, what the guy said it was. Oh, I'm just going to call it Venus, like it's a statue of Venus. They think now that it's a statue of a prostitute.
Yep.
Because they've been trying to figure out like what, because her arms are already broken when they found it. So it's like, okay, what position would her arms have been in? And people come up with all these crazy ideas that never quite fit. And they've come up with one that fits perfectly. And that is that she's spinning, because the way you spun back then was, you had the cotton out here, and then you had this little bulby thing here that you actually spun, and the thread went down from there on a weight. And that was how you spun. And that was what prostitutes did in between clients. Yeah. So in all probability, Venus de Milo was a prostitute.
Yeah, here's another fun fact about prostitutes. Historically speaking, the idea that prostitution is bad, evil, and immoral, that's actually a very recent modern thing, because historically speaking, prostitutes were now, I'm not saying they were glorified or seen as good, and definitely they suffered, some backlash and all that, but they were seen as a legitimate profession. It wasn't the ideal profession, but there was
it wasn't what proper people of good breeding in the upper crust did. They didn't have prostitutes, they had concubines, and it was the lower classes, the common people, who had prostitutes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but
if you were somebody, you had a concubine. You didn't go to a prostitute. You used one of your concubines.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's also pretty funny, when we hear these stories about, it's like, we now know that rulers like Napoleon had secret lovers beside their wife, and most people, anyone who knows about societal standards back in those days, would say, well, duh! Almost everyone of nobility.
Was French.
It was not even just in France, even just up to a couple centuries ago. Throughout Europe and everything, the idea was you married to either improve your station or as an alliance between great families or whatever it was, and then you bore the children that were the heir to the estate. That was why you had a wife. The idea of having, a person you love and you make a connection with, that was your mistress. That wasn't your wife. That was your mistress. And this idea of, what the conservatives of all this time were calling traditional marriage, we're standing up for traditional marriage, that's fairly recent. It was fairly recent, this idea that you married someone for love, because that's a recent idea.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean...
In the Bible, polygamy is the most common form of marriage.
In the Old Testament, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anywhere in the Bible that actually condemns polygamy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there is. If someone knows a verse, please post in the comments or something like that. But I don't think there's any part of the Bible where it says polygamy is wrong.
I've even heard that contrary to popular belief, there's nothing in the Bible that says masturbation is wrong. Like the only thing that like people have been been able to interpret as masturbation is bad is from this one line that I can't 100% quote, but it's like it's better to plant your seed in the belly of a whore than on the ground. But many scholars are thinking it's actually not supposed to be taken literally, and it actually might have meant something else actually.
Yeah, well, the other thing to do is there was someone who, instead of impregnating his wife, spilled his seed, and that made God angry, not because he didn't like, spilling your seed, but because in that one particular case, God had ordered him to father the child, and he didn't do it. And that's what it was. He was disobeying. It wasn't like this general thing against masturbation or withdrawal or anything like that. It was just like that one time.
That's another thing that baffles me about Jehovah's Witnesses. Like they make up excuses, for not doing this and that because, well, it's not in the Bible. Well, then by that logic, you can't drive cars, speak English, or do all this other stuff that we do because that's not in the Bible either.
What are you talking about? The real Bible is King James, the exact Bible that Jesus carried under his arm, the King James Bible. I've actually heard people claim that.
What I find funny is, in Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they'll say, oh, this isn't in the Bible, but you'll turn to a page and it's exactly in the Bible. And they try to claim that Jesus was crucified on, I think it's a pole, But it really, there's, even by the own Bible's lore, it's like, no, that doesn't.
Probably the dumbest excuse they ever have is why they don't celebrate birthdays, and that's because, well, there's only 2 times birthdays were celebrated, and in both of them, somebody got decapitated. And I'm pretty sure most likely they're doing kind of like what they did, with the masturbation thing. They're taking one thing and they're taking it out of context. Like, they're like, yeah, this guy had a birthday and he got his head cut off. Completely ignoring that it probably happened because of something else he did, not because he was having a birthday. It was probably something.
Right, that was just the opportunity the assassin had.
Yeah,
because that's where you have a lot of people around and everything. Hey Rachel, glad I could give you a giggle. Hello JC.
Yeah.
Also, three minutes left. I think you're joining in just before we have to sign off.
Yeah. Here's another thing that Jehovah's Witnesses don't like to talk about. The guy who founded the religion, he was a fraud because he claimed that he found like these hidden texts in the Bible that were trying to, like the original Bible that they weren't telling you about. And one person challenged him and it was revealed that he couldn't speak ancient Greek. And here's the thing, if you cannot speak ancient Greek, you have no right to claim you discovered something in a Bible because contrary to popular belief, the original Bible was written in Greek.
The New Testament was written in Greek. The Old Testament was written in this weird form of Hebrew that didn't have vowels.
Aramaic.
Well, no, I'm talking about the Old Testament.
I know.
Maybe later parts of the Old Testament were in Aramaic, and I think there are some parts of the New Testament that were Aramaic, but primarily the New Testament is Greek. The Old Testament is Hebrew.
Yeah. That's actually a common criticism that people have said about the Passion of the Christ that shows just how much they actually don't know about the times that Jesus Christ was growing up in, because it's like all the Jews are speaking Aramaic and all the Romans are speaking Latin, but the thing is, Aramaic was falling out of favor by the time of Jesus's time. And while, yes, Latin was the official language of the Roman Empire, that was only spoken when you were within Rome, because that's the language everyone spoke.
This was the Hellenistic period. Everyone spoke Greek.
Yeah. Yeah. People fail to realize ancient Greek was basically the English of the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, because almost everyone could speak it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, if you grow up in Mexico, you speak Spanish, but a lot of Mexicans learn to speak English for purposes of commerce or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and SKM talks about something we mentioned a little bit ago about Jesus being fed vinegar. It was most likely Pasco, Roman water and vinegar drink. Again, they didn't really know this, but if you put vinegar in the water, it kills the bacteria and it's healthier. They knew it was better, but they just didn't know why. So.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that Jehovah's Witnesses are correct about, though, but you don't need to be a Jehovah's Witness to debunk this is they point out that Christmas, wasn't about, the birth of Jesus. It was to cover up Saturnalia, which is true, but,
Well, it's a bunch of different traditions together.
Yeah.
And one of the funny ironies is that, one of the things we really love today is Christmas carols. That was actually banned. That was a part of Saturnalia, going around and singing songs, about the praising Saturn. That was one of the things they banned because they didn't like music. And even up to the Middle Ages, the only music that was allowed was Gregorian chant. And if you did things like actually play instruments and sing in harmony, that was a heresy. And it wasn't really until I think the 1700s. Like the 1700s when you actually started having Christmas carols.
Oh, and here's another fun fact about Christmas carols and their history behind them. The famous, Christmas carol, "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." There's actually a dark meaning behind one of the verses, which is "Now give us some figgy pudding," because
that always sounded rather selfish to me. Gimme.
Well, here's the origin of that. The reason is because historically speaking, carolers were often crowds that would gather around during Christmas, and they would go around and sing and dance and all that, and they would also demand food and money and wine. And if you didn't give that to them, they would do one of two things: they would vandalize your house, or they will stay outside all night and sing as loudly as they could, and they wouldn't leave and let you get any sleep unless you gave them what they wanted.
Yeah, that's Halloween had kind of a similar origin there with trick or treating.
Yeah.
Yeah. All sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah. I mean, people love to complain. It's like, oh, I don't like Christmas anymore. It's all corporate and it's about selfishness. Oh no, it was much worse during the medieval era. I mean,
but going back to something else I was saying earlier, we were talking about Christmas trees. They have, I think in prehistoric Germany, even before the development of written language, there's evidence of, the remains of evergreen trees with gourds that had been painted, just like we would put Christmas balls up on a Christmas tree. People have always been doing that.
Oh yeah, here's another funny thing, and actually an ex-Jehovah's Witness pointed this out. It's like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they hate pretty much every single holiday because they say it's not a Christian holiday, it's actually a pagan holiday. But yet they still, believe in the idea of marriage, even though the traditional quote-unquote marriage, that actually came from pagan traditions, including the white dress and the ring.
Yep.
Yeah.
And back to Rachel was talking about the music again. Bach never wrote any operas. And the reason why was he always wrote music for the church. And in the church, you didn't have operas, you had oratorios. Handel's Messiah is an oratorio. You have, a story and you have the parts being sung and everything. But the idea of actually dressing in costume and acting it out was this big heresy to the church back then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I recall correctly,
especially when you had Mozart and people like that making, operas based on, things like, Egyptian and Greek mythology and Roman mythology and things like that. Oh man, that was like devil worshipping to them.
Oh yeah, I've actually heard people, saying, it's like, Mozart was controversial growing up, and so many people are like, but how? Like most of his songs didn't even have lyrics. Why were they controversial? And the reason is because of the writing style. They were often bouncy, emotional, and they were designed to arouse the passions. And like you said, music that made you feel anything other than divine spiritually was seen as sinful. They wanted music to be like.
And they really didn't like Beethoven because one thing Beethoven wanted the music to be was loud. Beethoven would have loved, amplifiers and distorted guitars and things like that. And that's why you have a lot of stuff with Beethoven where you have the orchestra get really, really, really quiet and then it just bangs in. Because he knew the ears are kind of like eyes, you get adjusted to a dark room, then someone turns on a light and he goes, bye. He does that. He has the orchestra play really quiet for a while, so your ears adjust to the soft tones, and then they just come in and he just wanted to plaster you to the far wall with sound.
Yeah, and another fun fact about Mozart, and yes, this has actually been confirmed because we have the original papers. Yes, he did write a song that basically was called Lick My Ass Clean." And apparently the reason, I don't know if it's true or not, there's actually some reasons of why he wrote that. Some people say that he did it just as a joke with his friends, but I've actually heard some people theorize that he actually wrote that song because he was self-aware that the majority of music that classical composers wrote, they didn't have lyrics. So they're like, so how would they know what the context of the music is supposed to be if it doesn't have lyrics? You can call it whatever you want and people will think it's beautiful. It's like, oh, it's some sort of sonata in D minor. No, it's called I Like to Sniff Butts or something like that.
Yeah, he was always doing satire and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
his middle name wasn't actually Amadeus. It was this big long thing, Johannes Christophus Wolfgangus Philodelius Mozart or something like that. And I think it was his wife who started calling him Adame. I'm not sure where that came from, but he wrote this one letter where he was basically parodying how much everyone loved Latin, and he did everything ending with us, and every word was like this us, that us, and something like we would parody, medieval English by putting eth on the end of everything, and he signed it Wolfgangus Amadeus Mozartus. And somehow from that, the Amadeus became regarded as his middle name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if I recall correctly, like, the only serious, actual serious song that was meant to have, an actual dark meaning behind it was, ironically, the very last song he ever wrote, which he never even finished.
The Requiem, yeah.
Yeah, it was that one he was writing while he was literally dying of what many people now believe was probably rheumatic fever.
Well, I think it was probably a few things.
Yeah, and some people think he was murdered. Some people think Salieri murdered him, but
that's been pretty much debunked by this point.
Yeah,
Salieri and Mozart actually liked each other. Salieri had no reason to murder Mozart.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, generally
pretty good friend.
Generally speaking, the general consensus that people believe what he actually died of was simply he didn't take proper care of himself. He overworked himself.
And he didn't eat right, and he didn't. Yeah, he drank a lot. Yeah, he did all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, he didn't take. Yeah, he didn't take care of himself. He drank a lot. He stayed up all night. He didn't get enough sleep, and all it took was for him to catch one touch of a disease, most likely rheumatic fever, as they suspect, and that did him in just because he wasn't taking care of himself.
Yeah. People pretend that music artists were so proper back then, but no, they were as much as partiers as
Beethoven was like a rock star. This whole thing about, you don't clap between movements, you sit in silence and wait for the orchestra to play. That was not how it was in Beethoven's time. They would cheer, they would just go nuts, and Beethoven would go out and throw hankies into the audience and things like that. I mean, it was like this big party, And Rachel kind of says like that, everyone gangsta till the boys pull up with the classical piano music. I'm telling you, get a really good amplifier system with some really good bass, crank up the Brandenburg Concerti.
Here's another fun fact about classical music, and this actually kind of pertains to Bach. Bach was not a pianist. In fact, he didn't touch a piano until
he was an organist.
Yeah, people are like, but aren't organs pianos? No, they've got keys like pianos, but
they didn't even have the modern piano. The closest thing they had, and Bach wrote a piece called the Well-Tempered Clavier, and he also wrote, Beethoven was the Hammer Clavier, but the Well-Tempered Clavier, I'm pretty sure, was Bach. That was the first time you had kind of like the inklings of what was going to become the modern pianoforte, which is the actual name of the instrument. We just say piano because it's shorter, but
actually,
I think Mozart made. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the historian. He reviews movies, but he kind of does like historical accuracy and stuff. But Mozart was like one of the first artists to do, I think it was opera in a different language other than Italian.
Yeah. Yeah, actually doing it in the German vernacular. That was and he also had translators put it into English, and
yeah, another.
He actually wrote from memory a piece.
Yeah,
he copied the piece. He pirated it.
Oh, that was common. Everyone did that. There was no copyright protection for anything then.
Yeah.
Well, not for music anyway. Not in Germany, which is why it was so prolific.
It's another thing about Mozart too is that one of his most famous songs for an opera, the Queen's aria from the Night Flute. It's often portrayed as being like this bouncy, happy opera song. But from what I've heard, it actually was a pretty dark song. In fact, Mozart admitted to some of his friends in his writings that he actually kind of felt a little scared when he wrote it because people asked him why is that.
Which one are you talking about?
The whole point of the whole point of that song is to represent rage.
Which one are you talking about?
The Queen's aria, where she's singing to her daughter, basically saying, "You're going to kill this man you're in love with, because if you don't, I'm going to disown you." I can't do the octaves, but it's that one where they sing really high and fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can send you a link to it when it's over with, but yeah, it's actually a very dark song, and Mozart said in his writings that it was meant to embody pure human rage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone about 10 minutes over, so why don't we get our final thoughts out?
Okay.
Yeah. Everything you just have to get out before we close off for another month.
Yeah. Einstein did not fail math.
No, he was actually a very good mathematician.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to, close it off for another month. So comments for the Common God, shares for the Share Throne, like, subscribe, the bell, the bill, drill, actually. The bill too, because you can come to donate.pagosity.tv and give whatever you think. We didn't have any super chats tonight, but we had a lot of good chats in the regular chat. So
speaking of drills, I want to say this real quickly. I was going to tell you a joke about a drill, but I decided not to because it's boring. Yeah, dad joke.
All right, yeah. So, despite that joke, I'll say thanks to Chris and Executioner and Pip. Thanks for joining me, guys.
No problem, man.
And thank you for watching.